Good evening, Year 11, and welcome to the night before news for paper one of your PPEs, your first maths paper. Just a reminder that this is a non-calculator paper, so don't have your calculator with you right now. Don't use it for any of these questions. That's not going to be helpful tomorrow. The hub is open from 7 o'clock in the morning. Just as a reminder, if you want to come in early and have some support with some last bits of revision, we will go into the conservatory and the canteen a little bit later than that to be doing some more last minute stuff, but we will have maths teachers in the hub to support you looking at some more exam resources, so please do feel free to take advantage of that. Some important reminders and tips: please make sure you attempt all of the questions. You've got an hour and a half, that's a lot of time for an 80 mark paper. If you work at a mark a minute, that should still give you 10 more minutes to go back through and check anything, but also to attempt anything that you haven't attempted the first time round. Those marks, those odd 1 marks that you can pick up on some of the most challenging questions in the paper really do add up. So don't leave anything blank. And also, please make sure you show all of your working. There will be plenty of calculations, especially early on in this paper, that you can quite easily do in your head. So I'm not necessarily suggesting that you do your working to make sure you get stuff right, because I know that some of you are going to be really confident with your numeracy, but it's much more about actually demonstrating where you're getting your numbers from and what you've worked out and why, and you will pick up marks there. For some questions you'll get full marks just for an answer without working, but sometimes you don't, so we're just going to make sure. I'm going to look at 3 topics with you in a bit more detail today, but here's a list of some of the things that you can expect to see specifically in paper 1. It's really difficult to predict what will come up in a maths paper because you've got 3 papers to look at, and some things will come up more than once, some things won't come up at all. But these things are quite common in paper 1 exams, and some of them especially won't be worth revising once paper 1's out of the way. Starting with fraction operations, this is hugely common in paper 1. It will come up. That is practically guaranteed. It won't come up in paper 2 or 3, so it's well worth revising it now and making sure you're on top of it, and then you can forget about it until after the PPEs. Laws of indices, expanding and factorising, but really all of your algebra skills, things like solving equations. And when we talk about expanding and factorising, that's single brackets and double brackets, but you've also got things like collecting like terms, or just being able to multiply or simplify an algebra, so keep an eye out for those. Estimation, again, very likely to come up. It will not come up in paper 2 or 3, so make sure you've had a look at that before paper 1. Standard form is really common because they like to give standard form questions in non-calculator exams, particularly calculations with standard form, multiplication, division, addition, subtraction. It can come up in paper 2 and 3, but it's obviously much easier because you can just put it into your calculator, so probably doesn't need revision for those papers, but should be revised tonight if you haven't already. Prime factor decomposition can come up in any of the papers, but is more common in paper 1. Probability is quite common across the papers. Transformations can come up in any of the papers. Ordering fractions is a good topic to have a look at. It's actually more common in paper 1 than it is in 2 and 3 because, again, your calculator can make those questions a bit too easy, and the way that you do them is different in a non-calculator exam. You need to find common denominators rather than being able to quite easily convert them into decimals, for example. Fraction, decimal and percentage conversions, again, common in all of the papers, but a little bit harder to do some of them in non-calculator exams, and they do like to include them. And exact trig values, far from guaranteed to come up, but it can only come up in paper 1, so it's worth having a look at it and making sure you're on top of that. If it doesn't come up, then the time that you put into it isn't wasted, because of course it could come up in your real exam, but it will not come up in paper 2 or 3. And those things that can't come up in the calculator exams, I think they're particularly worth investing some time in tonight, knowing that you don't need to have a look at them later. Now, as I say, I picked out 3 topics. The first one that I am going to focus in on is those fraction operations. And these are really rare in calculator exams because, again, you could just put them into your calculator, but you're likely to be asked to do these in your non-calculator paper. there's a real difference between how we do addition and subtraction and multiplication and division. If we're adding and subtracting, then it's important that we get common denominators to start with. So on this question here, we've got a 3 and a 5. Those both go into 15. And then our numerators need to be scaled up in proportion. So for the first fraction where we've gone from 3 to 15, we've multiplied by 5. We need to do the same thing to the 2, which is going to give us 10 15ths. That's the same as 2/3. And the second fraction, the 5's been multiplied by 3 to make 15. So we do the same thing to the 2, which gives you 6 15ths. And then we can just subtract the numerators, or if it's an addition question, just add the numerators. The denominator will stay the same, and here we get 4 15ths. You're less likely to be asked to simplify the answer to an addition and subtraction question, and in fact, it's less likely to simplify anyway. But it's really common in a multiplication or division question to be asked for your answer in its simplest form. And there's a couple of ways you can go about answering this question. I'm just going to rewrite it. You can simplify the question right now. Neither of those fractions simplify, but you can do what we call cross-cancelling. You can look across the diagonals and simplify in that way. So in this case, the 3 and the 6 can both be divided by 3, and you could rewrite the question as 5 over 2 times 1 over 4, and then you could work it out. Or you can work out the answer to this multiplication as it is. 5 times 3 is 15, and 6 times 4 is 24. And then you can try and simplify. It's often easier to simplify at the start by cross-cancelling, but if you're not familiar with cross-cancelling, don't try and do that now. Go with what you know, but do try and concentrate on how that's going to simplify. 15 and 24 both divide by 3, which is going to give us 5 over 8. If you get a division question, it's very similar. Just remember you need to do keep, change, flip first. This idea of cross-cancelling can only be applied when you've got multiplication between your two fractions. So don't try and do that at the start of any other type of question. So I'm going to give you one to have a go at. You can pause the video now and try this, and then I'm going to reveal the answer when you're ready. So these are the answers to those two questions. We've got 17 over 30 for that first one. Just to show you the mark scheme here, looking at part A, you can see you get your first mark for finding a common denominator. Now you could actually make a mistake there. So if you get the wrong numerators, but you do try and get your two fractions over 30, you are still going to get that method mark there. And then your accuracy mark, which is what A1 stands for, 1 mark for accuracy, is given for the correct answer. And see, it says correct answer only. It does mean or equivalent. So if you've got a fraction that could be simplified and you simplify it, you're not going to get marked down, but you don't need to do that. You can just leave the answer as it is unless you're told otherwise. And then for the part B, again, there's a method mark, and it says this mark is given for finding a method to multiply two fractions. Essentially, you want to demonstrate that you're doing 2 times 5 and 3 times 6. You can see in the mark scheme that they're showing that calculation. You don't need to do that. If you've got 10 over 18, you're absolutely going to get that mark. And then you're going to get your second mark only for the correct answer. And this isn't an or equivalent. It says to give your answer in its simplest form. So that's going to need to be 5 over 9 for you to get the 2 marks. The next topic we're going to look at is highest common factor. And again, this is quite common in a non-calculator exam. It can come up in calculator papers. And the numbers that I've got here are quite big for us to find the highest common factor, 84 and 144, because there's two ways we can do this. You could list all of the factors of 84 and all of the factors of 144, but you might be there for a while trying to find them all, and you could really easily miss some. But I could do that, and I could try and find the biggest number that appears in both lists. I wouldn't recommend that with numbers this big. Lowest common multiple, you might prefer to list the multiples rather than do what we're going to do in a moment. But it's really up to you. The way you're intended to do this, and you'll see this in the mark scheme when we try one in a moment, is through prime factor decomposition, factor trees. where we just split these numbers into pairs of numbers which multiply to make them. And you can go about this in any order that you like. So I know some people will really prefer to start by just dividing by 2 as many times as they can, and then by 3, and then by 5. But if you spot a bigger pair of numbers which multiply to make the number that you're looking at, it can actually make this process easier. So from the start, I could go 4 and 21, for example, where 4 is 2 and 2, which are both prime, and 21 is 3 and 7, which are both prime. You might find that easier than going 2 and 42 and then going from there. And that's particularly true on this question here, 144. You could go 2 and 72, but it's quite easy to get that wrong and think that it's a different number which multiplies by 2 to make 144. And 72 is quite awkward to split as well. But you might spot 12 and 12, and that's going to make this significantly easier, partly because they're the same, so that's going to cut down the amount of thinking we have to do. But each of these is now really easy to split. 2 and 6, and then 6 is 2 and 3. And it's exactly the same thing for the other 12 here. And then what you're going to want to do is just rewrite those sets of prime factors as a product. So 84 is 2 times 2 times 3 times 7, and 144 is 2 times 2 times 2 times 2 times 3 times 3. And then we can sort those into a Venn diagram, where we have the factors of 84, or rather the prime factors of 84 on the left, and the prime factors of 144 on the right. And the numbers that these lists have in common can be written once in the intersection here in the middle. So there's a 3 in both lists there as well. And the factors that they have that are unique to each number can just go out in these circles, or these areas here. Now, for the highest common factor, you're just looking at the intersection, which is that 2, 2, and 3 there. And we just multiply that back together, which is 12. If you're asked to find the lowest common multiple, all of the working that was done is still relevant. You wouldn't just multiply the intersection together, you would multiply all of these factors together, and that will give you the LCM. So I'm going to give you a highest common factor question to have a go at. Again, feel free to pause the video so that you can give this a try, and then we can see how you've got on with that in a moment. So hopefully we've got 27, and I just want to show you that the mark scheme very much is implying that we should use prime factors, but you aren't going to get marked down on a question like this if you use a different method to get the answer. It's 2 marks, so your working out doesn't actually need to be there for you to get the accuracy mark. It would do on anything that's more than 2 marks. But it does also mean you've got that flexibility in terms of how you do the working out. You could list the factors of 108 and the factors of 135. But as you can imagine, noticing that 27 is a factor of both of those might be quite a tricky thing to do. This method should work a lot more consistently for you. So it's worth practicing, it's worth making sure we're ready to use that, because if it doesn't come up in paper 1, there's still a decent chance it could come up in paper 2 or 3. Now, the last topic that I want to look at this evening before your exam tomorrow is two-way tables. You've got a few more suggestions of topics that I showed you earlier in the video that you can then go and look at, but this is something that I don't think many of you will have seen for a while. But the other thing I want to point out is that this isn't clearly a two-way tables question. I've told you it is, so you know that's what it's going to be. But I need you to be able to recognise a two-way tables question in your exam. And the key, as you read through this, is that these 80 students are being split in 2 different types of categorisation. Each student walks to school, or cycles to school, or gets the bus to school. And then it goes on to talk about boys and girls. That's your two-way table, where we can split the data in those 2 different types of categorization. So I've got boys and girls, which are going to make the heads of my rows, and I'm going to need a total. And we've got walk, cycle, struggling to write now. And bus, and again we're going to need a total. Now that is going to create your two-way table, which doesn't need to be a work of art. You don't need to use a ruler to draw it. It's much more important that you can get on with the question quite quickly than a table looking really neat. However, I would aim to use the space you're provided to make sure the boxes are big enough to clearly write the numbers in. And we're going to start by going through the information in the question and populating as much of that as possible before we start trying to work anything else out. Every number that appears in the question is going to get ticked off as it goes into our table. So the very first one tells us there are 80 students. That is the total number of students. So that goes in that bottom right box. There are 44 girls. So the total number of girls is 44. Tick. Now, you could now work out the total number of boys, but I'm not going to do that yet. I'm going to work out the rest of the information first. 18 of the girls walk to school, so girls who walk, 18. 14 of the boys cycle, so boys cycle, 14. Tick. And then here we've got two bits of information in one line. 12 of the 20 students who get the bus are boys. So there are 20 students who get the bus, total, tick. 12 of them are boys, tick. Now that's all of the information that we're given. We're asked to find how many students walk. So what we're looking for here is this box there. And we can fill in any information if it is the only missing value on its row or column. So I could, for example, work out how many girls get the bus, because that's the only value missing in that column, or I could work out how many boys there are in total, because that's the only value missing in that column. Now you'll have got the first mark just for filling in the information you're given. You'll quite quickly get a second mark for working out some of these first calculations. 80 take away 44 means there are 36 boys, and 20 take away 12 means that there are 8 girls that get the bus. And there are now some more values that I can work out. I can work out how many boys walk, because that's the only missing value on that row, and I can work out how many girls cycle, because it's the only missing value on that row. So to do that, if I do the boys that walk first, 14 plus 12 is 26. 36 take away 26 is 10. And then for the girls row, 18 plus 8 is 26. 44 take away 26 is 18. Now I can answer the question from here. I can work out how many people walk in total, but I'm still going to work out the whole table. I can work these two cells out in whatever order I want. So I'll work out how many people cycle in total first. So 14 plus 18 is 32. But this last box is now really, really important. So regardless of how soon you come across the answer, the last box is going to be really important, because this is how you're going to check that you've done this correctly. There are two ways that I can work out the total number of students that walk. I could use the column, and I could do 10 plus 18, which is 28. Or I could do the 32 plus the 20, which is 52, and then take that away from 80, which is 28. What I'm checking is that both ways of finding this last value give me the same answer, because if they don't, I've made a mistake somewhere and I need to go back and fix it. But there it is, that's my answer, and that's 4 marks. It's quite a lot of marks. Two-way tables are really good marks, but you need to recognise it's two-way tables. You can answer these questions without the table. It's far more complicated and difficult to do. It's a lot more difficult to keep track of what you've worked out and what's left to work out, so I try and avoid doing that. Oh, it's the wrong slide. So, I'll come back to that in a second. Here's one for you to try. Again, pause the video, and then we'll go back to the answers, and we'll have a quick look at the mark scheme as well. So here are the answers. Well, the answer is 68, and hopefully we got that. And I'm just showing you a bit of the mark scheme here, because there's too much to put on the screen otherwise. But one thing that's encouraging to know is that the mark scheme does include the table. That's very much the way you're intended to do this. You'll notice I haven't written any other working out at all. You absolutely can. So if you're struggling a little bit with some of the addition and subtraction, then definitely do bits of column addition and column subtraction. Have those on the page to help you, but you won't get marks for them. You'll only get marks for the numbers in the table. You'll notice these are P1 marks, not M1 marks. An M1 mark is a method mark. These are process marks. So the mark is given for a process to put the information given in the question into a two-way table. So that was the first thing we did, just ticked off the numbers in the data and put those in. And then the second process mark is to find the total number of boys in the class. So there's quite an easy second mark just for working out something that should hopefully be quite obvious once we've got the total number of students and the total number of girls. And then a third process mark is given for a process to find the total number of boys who walk. So what they've done there is they've picked something else that you will require to answer the rest of the question, but will take a few more steps for you to get to. Sometimes when you see these mark schemes, there are more options in terms of how you can get the second and third marks. So if you found either the total number of boys or the number of girls, you get the bus, for example, that would get you the second mark. But it doesn't matter. Essentially, as you fill in the table, you pick up the mark quite quickly. And then for identifying your final answer, you get all 4 marks. But you have to have gone through the process. If you have an answer without any working for something like this, you'll definitely get 0. So make sure you are doing your table to pick those marks up. So, just to finish off, a reminder of some of the resources that you can use to help you continue to revise. Feel free to go back to the video, to that list of topics that I showed you earlier. It's a suggestion. There may well be other things that you want to look at. I haven't mentioned, for example, fractions of amounts or percentages without a calculator. But of course, you've got Hegarty, and then you've got websites like Corbett Maths, Maths Genie, and Revision Maths, where you can get hold of exam questions, whether that's practice papers or whether that's sets of questions for particular topics. And on Exam Queue, you can search for a topic and see lots of exam questions as well. It's up to you whether there are specific topics that you know you want to work on, or whether actually you'd rather just go on something like Maths Genie and grab yourself a paper 1 and just work your way through that. Either just as some general revision, practice papers are a fantastic way to revise, or to help you identify some things that you want to work on in a bit more detail. But best of luck for tomorrow. Please remember to attempt every question. Please remember to show you're working. And also remember that if you want to come into the hub at 7 o'clock, or any time from 7 o'clock, you're very, very welcome to. And we'll see you in the morning. Thank you very much. Best of luck.